Hey, wake up. It's Means Morning News. Just after 11 a.m. on the East Coast, I'm Sam Sachs, the newsman, a.k.a. Mr. News, a.k.a. the Newsarino, a.k.a. Charlemagne the News God. Let's fire this up. And we begin this morning with a retrospective on the Gaza Aid Pier, the gimmicky humanitarian project by the Pentagon and Department of State that cost an estimated $230 million. This week, the Inspector General for the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, released an oversight report on the project. It found that it was a failure, at least when it comes to delivering aid. But we all know its actual purpose was to give the Biden administration a way to save face on its policy of appeasement toward Israel, which was producing mass starvation in Gaza. The JLOTS, as it's known, which stands for Joint Logistics Over the Shore, that's the pier, was only operational for 20 days between May and July, beset by security concerns and the relentless sea. That's well short of the 90 days planners had intended the pier to be operational, and it was supposed to deliver aid to 500,000 or more Palestinians each month for 3 months. By the time the project was abandoned, it only delivered enough aid to feed 450,000 people for just 1 month. A pretty damning part of the IG report confirms that officials at USAID knew that the pier was likely to be a disaster and that it would probably hamper other efforts to get aid into Gaza. The report described consultations between the White House and officials at USAID's Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance, or BHA. Quote, BHA advocated for transporting aid through land routes and did not pursue planning a maritime route because of the logistical and technical challenges it would present. Multiple BHA staff noted that using JLOTS was not an option USAID would typically recommend in humanitarian response operations. Now, here's the key part. Quote, multiple USAID staff expressed concerns that the focus on using JLOTS would detract from the agency's advocacy to open land crossings in Israel and Egypt, which were seen as more efficient and proven avenues for delivering aid to Gaza. Instead of listening to that advice, President Biden, who needed a shiny distraction to relieve pressure from his failed Gaza policy, went ahead and announced the pier anyway during his State of the Union address in March, forcing in motion the ill-fated operation. In its wake, the starvation crisis in Gaza has only worsened, with almost everyone in the enclave suffering from some sort of hunger insecurity. The Israeli military continues to attack aid workers, making the problem worse. Just this week, in fact, the World Food Program again suspended operations in Gaza after vehicles were shot at near an Israeli checkpoint. The UN put into scale just how destructive Israel's campaign in Gaza has been and what it's subjecting the population to. Since the beginning of the year, the Israeli military's so-called humanitarian zone has been squeezed from an area that was about 33% of the Gaza Strip to now just 11%. So most of Gaza's 2.2 million residents have now been relocated to that zone that's just about 15 square miles, which is about 2/3 the size of Manhattan, which has a population of only 1.7 million people and lots of high-rises. And now the Israeli military appears to be running the same playbook in the West Bank, where it is continuing its largest military operation there in 2 decades. An estimated 18 Palestinians have been killed over the last 2 days, and Israeli forces have targeted refugee camps in the occupied Palestinian territories. The Palestinian Prisoners Society reported that roughly 9,900 Palestinians are held across 23 prisons and detention centers, facilities that human rights organizations have uncovered rampant torture and sexual abuse at. The conditions for Palestinians continue to worsen as U.S. bombs and money keep flowing to the Israeli military. Well, it took a week of striking, but Cornell University finally agreed to give more than 1,000 of its workers fair wages. Late Tuesday night, the UAW negotiating committee and the school agreed to terms on a new labor contract. According to reports, the agreement includes a 25% pay increase and the elimination of a tiered wage system. It also, according to the UAW, includes improvements to time off policies, uniforms, and inclement weather and safety protections. UAW Region 9 Director Daniel Vicente said in a statement, quote, "The workers at Cornell used their power to push back on Cornell's arrogance and win a great contract. They stood together and showed the university that they were willing to do what was needed to win what they deserve." The proposal still needs to be approved by rank and file membership in a vote that will take place over the weekend. In another big labor story, flight attendants at United Airlines are now poised to strike if the company doesn't offer a fair new contract and if the government allows a picket. Members of the Association of Flight Attendants, CWA, voted 99.9% this week to authorize a strike. The workers have been out of contract for 3 years and are seeking higher wages. They also want to get paid for their work. Currently, flight attendants are only paid when the doors on the plane are closed and not for all the work they do preparing the plane for passengers before that. The union convened informational pickets at 20 airports this week. Airline workers, like railroad workers, are required to seek permission from the federal government before going on strike. I guess they're not required to, but in order for the strike to be considered legal, they are. The National Mediation Board oversees labor disputes among rail and plane workers. Now that the union has voted to authorize a strike, the board will impose a 30-day cooling off period before it decides to allow the strike to move ahead or force the union and airlines into more negotiations. Strikes are always difficult and require sacrifice from the workers, but they're more likely now to garner sympathy from the public than in any other point in almost 90 years. According to Gallup, the union approval rating isn't quite at a historical high at 70%, but the disapproval rating is at 23%, which is the lowest it's been since 1936. Elon Musk's artificial intelligence company, xAI, is reportedly operating dirty, polluting infrastructure without any sort of permit. This concerns a data center in Memphis, Tennessee, where computers are constantly running, developing AI models and products that we collectively do not need. In order to power all these computers, xAI is relying on good old-fashioned gas turbines. 18 of them that, according to a complaint filed by the Southern Environmental Law Center, were installed without a permit. That complaint was sent to the Shelby County Health Department. It's according to CNBC. Shelby County has one of the worst smog problems in the country, and environmental groups and public health advocates say that Musk's AI company is making the problem even worse. This is from CNBC. Quote, "The groups wrote in their letter that the xAI turbines already in place have the capacity to emit an estimated 130 tons of nitrogen oxides annually, which would rank them as the 9th largest source of the pollutants in the county. Their combined capacity could power around 50,000 homes." So the guy who made a name for himself building clean cars to save the environment is running a massive polluting operation, all so that you can get your computer to do your homework for you. This makes a pattern at Elon Musk's companies: total disregard for environmental law. Earlier this month, it was reported SpaceX had installed a water deluge system at its launch site in Texas without a permit, and on multiple occasions turned it on, spraying toxic chemicals into the environment unlawfully. Those blatant violations of environmental law will make it more difficult for SpaceX to obtain launch licenses from the FAA for future Starship tests. The company also suffered a setback on Wednesday when a first-stage booster rocket tipped over and exploded as it tried to autonomously land on a barge in the Atlantic Ocean. Due to the mishap, all SpaceX Falcon 9 rockets are now grounded pending an investigation. That will affect a planned mission this week financed by billionaire Jason Isaacman that was supposed to include the first ever spacewalk by private individuals. The so-called Polaris Dawn mission has a price tag of $52 million, and it's now indefinitely delayed. That's a shame. Let's open up the archives. It's time for This Week in Working Class History, a segment made possible by the kind folks at Working Class History. Follow them on social media. We begin in 1934. It's the Salinas lettuce strike. It involved roughly 7,000 lettuce cutters and shed workers in the Salinas Valley of California, who went on strike for union recognition and higher wages. Half of the workers were Filipinos who were discriminated against and exploited by the growers and shippers. They organized into their own union, the FLU, the Filipino Labor Union. At the onset of the strike, the union had the support of more powerful labor organizations like the AFL. But that support dissolved away as the FLU maintained the strike despite being brutalized by racist mobs and police. Racism was also the reason why the Filipino workers faced resistance from both the media and other labor unions during the picket. After nearly a month of sustained violence against FLU members, leadership finally ended the strike, but workers did reach a settlement with growers and ended up with higher wages and union recognition, although there wasn't much left of the union after the brutal struggle. Next up, 1948, and a happy birthday to Fred Hampton. The revolutionary icon of the 1960s was born this week that year in Chicago. Hampton went on to be an outspoken Marxist, an anti-fascist, an anti-imperialist, the founder of the Rainbow Coalition, and a leader in the Black Panther Party. Because of all that, and his ability to inspire people, Hampton was assassinated in 1969 by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And finally, let's wrap it up in 1968 and the DNC police riot. Live in front of TV audiences, Chicago police attacked protesters, journalists, and anyone just standing around protests outside the Democratic National Convention. 10,000 anti-war activists had descended on the city to agitate against the Vietnam War, but they were quickly confronted by cops in riot gear wielding clubs. The cops lobbed tear gas at the protesters and beat them. A significant number of people were injured and more than 600 were arrested. A federal investigation later blamed the violence on the Chicago Police Department, describing their actions as a, quote, police riot. It recommended that some officers be prosecuted. Ultimately, 7 were charged with assault. None were convicted. The Democrats returned to Chicago for their convention again this year and were again met with anti-war protesters. This time, the Chicago police beat relatively fewer people. For more on these events and others that happened this week in Working Class History, follow the crew online at Working Class History. We'll be back with more next week. Okay, friends, the show ends with a sunrise from South Africa. It was sent in by Graham in the Magliasburg Mountains, an area where humans first emerged from, known as the cradle of humankind. Enjoy. Thank you, Graham. Show's over. Thank you for watching, and thanks to the team behind the scenes. Please sign up for Means TV, subscribe to our YouTube and podcast channels, and follow us on social media. One day capitalism will fall. Until then, we're going to be right here. See you tomorrow.